Thank you, Annie. Our next speaker is Dr. Kenneth Kriz. He is a Regents Distinguished Professor of Public Finance at Wichita State University. Ken conducts research focusing on subnational debt, policy and administration, public pension fund management, government financial risk management, and economic and revenue forecasting. Ken is a frequent presenter at public economics and public budgeting conferences and has published numerous peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters along with a textbook on qualitative research methods in public administration. Since 2009, Ken has provided economic and revenue forecasting models for many jurisdictions, including the city of Omaha, Nebraska. Ken was a Fulbright Scholar in the Republic of Estonia during 2004 and a Fulbright Senior Specialist in the Czech Republic in 2008. Welcome, Ken.
Well, thank you very much. It's kind of daunting to follow Annie and Bob, but I'm going to try and do my best. As Bob said, I'm going to concentrate a lot more on local issues as well as some state issues as we move forward. When we talk about the Wichita area or South Central Kansas, I think a couple themes that emerge are, first of all, we're in a period really of long-term secular stagnation, kind of bridging off what Bob talked about, but more localized to this area. Oh, I have a little backing vocal here, so we haven't been hanging from the chandelier. You know, whenever we talk about things like employment growth and things like that, I think it's too easy to get caught up in the short-term numbers, what are we doing during the current business cycle, et cetera. So I went all the way back to 1995, 20 years of employment growth, and if you look at Wichita, in those 20 years, our employment has gone up by 11%. 11% over 20 years, that's just a little over 0.5%, actually it's a little under 0.5% a year. This is not a problem which has just emerged. This is part of a long-term pattern. Now there have been ups and downs, but the graph is fairly flat. The only metropolitan area I could find in the region that has a similar type of slow growth is St. Louis. St. Louis is like 8%. Most of the other metropolitan areas are higher or much higher. Of course, Dallas is like 50% growth in the period, and Denver about 40%. But even Kansas City is 15%. Not great, but better than here. One of the things I think that, and I gave a talk on this at the Regional Economic Area Partnership meeting in the fall, is we aren't very well positioned to take advantage of some of the things in some of the industries that Bob talked about. Bob talked about information technology, he talked about genomics. We do have some activity in that area, but it certainly isn't an area which Wichita has a competitive advantage or a comparative advantage in. At the university, we did an analysis of the different industry groups and how fast they had been growing both in the Wichita area and nationally over time to try and figure out where we have kind of a comparative advantage. And in the areas that are growing strongly at the national level, the only areas that Wichita seems to have a relative comparative advantage in are things like educational services, nursing and residential care, and warehousing and storage, which is actually something which is okay. However, in what we might call lagging industries, so industries that have been contracting at the national level, we have a lot of areas where we have a comparative advantage. Things like machinery manufacturing. We've been growing much faster than the national average in that area, but it's contracting at the national level. So we're basically capturing a bigger piece of a falling pie. Or I always do that. My students always say I mangle my adverbs or whatever. We also, you know, so So we have an advantage in things like specialty trade contractors and construction, areas that don't show great potential. And so I think one of the things that we need to talk about is kind of realigning the economy, and that discussion has already started through the Blueprint on Regional Economic Growth and other types of organizations. They've been talking about realigning the economy, but we really need to have some new ideas. Now, whenever I talk about economic development and growth, the focus always seems to be in the media and a lot of things is, how are you doing? Are you losing businesses? Are new businesses moving into the area? Most business growth in an area is not explained by businesses moving into an area or by businesses leaving an area. Most job growth is caused by expanding businesses or startups. Okay, there's a paper by an individual at the Public Policy Institute of California. 1% of all California business growth over, I think he did 15 or 20-year period, 1% of the growth came from relocations. So 99% was from expansions or business startups. So what we need to be working on, I think, in this area are ways to help small businesses grow and be created. The Kauffman Family Foundation has something called an Index of Entrepreneurial Activity. They unfortunately don't have one for this area as a whole, but they have one for the state of Kansas. As usual, Kansas ranks right in the middle, 25th out of 50 states in terms of business startup activity. And their Main Street Business Index, which is an index of small business expansion and growth, we were 13th out of the small states, so they split basically things in half and said, we're probably never going to compete with California in terms of small business development in raw numbers. But among the small states, we're still right in the middle, 13th out of 25 small states. Not particularly great. Annie already talked about the 2013 tax cuts, which were supposed to help small businesses, and I want to correct her on one thing. I very rarely correct Annie because she knows more about this stuff than anybody else, and she said the cuts were designed to help small businesses. They weren't, okay? They were designed to help non-corporate entities, so closely held businesses. Those two are not the same thing. In fact, the Tax Foundation did a study in 2014. The Tax Foundation isn't exactly a liberal left-wing organization. And they showed pretty convincingly that the majority of people who would benefit from the tax credit were not small businesses, or from the pass-through exemption, were not small businesses. They were closely held corporations, but they were pretty darn large. And so not only has the tax policy had consequences in terms of economic growth, it just fundamentally was not very well targeted. If we wanted to help small businesses, there are a whole other host of ways that we could help small businesses develop. The last thing I wanted to say, since I'm a public finance guy, I'm supposed to talk about public finance. And one of the things that has happened here, which is really interesting to me, is there's been a lot of focus on local government finance. Along with state government finance, but the state government just passed a cap on the growth of local government revenues through the property tax levy system. And that was really interesting to me for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's very rare for a state government to pass something like that constraining local governments. Usually, if there is a limit on property taxes, it's passed by a referendum, it's passed by the people. For the state government to put that requirement on a set of local governments is I hate to say unprecedented, but if it's happened, it's only happened a few times. And it's ironic to me because by and large, from what I've seen in my studies, local government finance, at least in this area, is actually pretty strong. There's some metrics we look at. One of the fundamental metrics that we look at is kind of the size of the savings account, and he talked about the family analogy. We look at how much that governments have in what's called unassigned unrestricted fund balance, which is basically like their savings account, as a percentage of their annual revenue. So for Sedgwick County, it's about 25% of annual revenues. The rating agencies, the credit rating agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's, they say that if you have anything more than 15%, it indicates you're really on pretty good financial terms. Sedgwick County, 25.3%, City of Wichita, 13.4%. Ironically, the state of Kansas, who passed that law, negative 4.9%. So there is no savings left at the state level. We're literally running on a credit card. And if anybody here is a business owner, this is like having your equity be negative. And they can ponder what that means. It basically means you're out of business. And so I think it's rather ironic, especially when that has happened, that the state now has over $5.5 billion with a B in debt service, or in debt that they have to service. That's up from about $3 billion about 5 or 6 years ago. So debts at the state level have gone up dramatically. Debts at the local level are fairly modest, about $450 per capita for Sedgwick County against $1,900 per capita for the state. So that's something that interests me, and something I would love to discuss more is how we see such a focus on on local government finances when it's probably we should be looking someplace else.
Okay, our fourth panelist this evening is Susie Finn. She is the Director of Community Advancement and Young Professionals at the Wichita Metro Chamber of Commerce. Her role in the chamber can best be summed up as overseeing initiatives that advance the community with a focus on the important resource of talent. As the Director of Young Professionals of Wichita, she ensures the organization accomplishes short and long-term strategies for attracting and retaining talent in the Wichita region. In her role as Director of Community Advancement, she leads the Chamber's efforts to develop leaders in the community through leadership programming, intercity visits, and diversity and inclusion efforts. Susie has a degree in public relations from Marquette University and a Master of Business Administration from Wichita State. She is a boomeranger who returned to Wichita after spending 4 years in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Susie.
Thank you. What I didn't tell Sarah was that managerial economics was my lowest grade in my MBA. So I feel a little out of place up here, but I'm here tonight to talk about a specific local issue, and that is what impact does losing young talent, which we generally define as 21 to 39 years old, have on the local economy. And we at the Chamber, I say we, I wasn't here at the time. Back in 2004, the Chamber went through a visioneering process to figure out what does the community need to look like over the next 20 years, where do we need to make progress to make sure that we are a great place for businesses to grow and for people and families to grow and thrive. And part of the research that they found during that time was that brain drain was going to be a significant issue for the Wichita region over the next 10 to 20 years. And so that is the reason that Young Professionals of Wichita was created in the first place. A lot of people think that maybe it's just a social organization or a place for people to meet friends, and that happens. But the reason that the local business community felt that it was important for people to make friends went into the economic reasons for that. And that is that back in 2004, the numbers showed to get a child from birth to age 17 and then to graduate from college, it was a combined public and private investment of $300,000 per child. In 2009, that number was updated to $350,000 per child. So if you're losing about 20% of your young adult population every year, that is $600 million every year that have been invested in getting young people to graduate from college and that then some other community gets the benefit of. So those are really big numbers for businesses to go, that's a lot of money that we're investing, whether that's me as a parent or me as a taxpayer supporting somebody else's children to go through school. It's a lot of money, so that was really important. The research also showed that as the population ages, which we've seen in Wichita, that there's not going to be enough young talent already existing in the community to fill the pipeline of people retiring. And the recession did impact the rate at which that happened, but as we've recovered, we've started to see more and more companies who are trying to find the talent that they need to fill the places of people that are retiring, and they're having a harder time finding those people. So those are some of the reasons that Young Professionals exists, and that other groups like ours exist across the country and within the Wichita community. Then in 2013 and again last year in 2015, we got some more support that showed why this is an issue that matters to everybody, not just to those of us that are young professionals. And that was that James Chung with Reach Advisors came in as part of a Fuel the Fire series to get people excited about how we can, again, make progress on these issues. And the Wichita Community Foundation brought him again in 2015 to update some of those numbers. And one of the really interesting things that he told us was that Kansas is the #2 state at producing STEM-educated graduate-level students. So we've got a lot of really smart people that are getting educated at our great universities in Kansas, but then they're leaving. We are exporting most of those graduates to other communities, to the places where tech industries are thriving and other industries along those lines that the other panelists have mentioned. So if we don't do a good job of keeping those people here, we're losing those people that have the capacity for those high incomes and to help us be an innovative community. We also learned through that by the year 2020, which sounds far away but really isn't that far away now, the largest cohort within the workforce will be those people over the age of 55 that will still be working. The rest of the cohorts of workers weren't even close to those over age 55. And the reason that that's important is because the peak earning years and therefore the peak spending years for people in the workforce are the ages of 24 to 35, or 35 to 54. So once you get over 55, you're not spending as much. You're not buying as many new homes. You're not raising children. And so if we have people, if most of our workforce is in that age group that isn't spending as much anymore, then our economy starts to slow down. Not only do we not recover, but we slow down just because of the way the makeup of our age groups in Wichita. So that's something that's also really important in terms of why we need to continue working on attracting young talent to our community. And then we also risk losing the people who retire and their children have moved to other communities and they want to be close to their grandchildren, and so they don't stay in Wichita. And that's important because those people are the ones who can continue to invest in our nonprofits and to invest in our community, and we risk losing that wealth as well. So those are all reasons why it matters that we keep young professionals here in Wichita and that we continue to work on policies that help attract young professionals. Some other research that we have done in conversations with chamber members, we know that besides the economy as a whole, one of the most important things to their business is attracting and retaining good talent. And that's talent across the board, from manufacturing, non-manufacturing, IT, professional services, marketing, all of it. They all need to attract that great talent, and they're having a harder and harder time doing it. So it's really important for us to focus on that. As young professionals, we've also done some research to find out, okay, what makes people stay here or what makes people come here? The top things that we find are, of course, opportunities for jobs, and not just for jobs, but for career advancement. If you only get to a certain level and then you're stuck, and you have opportunities to continue to move up, continue to increase the amount of money that you're making, and you can do that in another community that you just can't do here, you're not going to stay. And so it's really important that we have those opportunities both for that first job and for the career advancement. In addition to that, they do want a vibrant downtown. They want things to do, and it needs to be a range of things to do. Things for people with families, things for people who are single, everything across the board is important to have things for people to do, ways for them to meet other people. If we get them here, and they don't make relationships outside of the workplace within the first 3 to 6 months, they're a lot less likely to stay for the long term. And so, again, that's why it's important to have that vibrant downtown, to focus on the development of the things to do, arts and culture, continue to cultivate those scenes. The two other things that we showed were the highest, most important, were healthy lifestyle options. So that's biking and walking paths and alternative modes of transportation, all those things. And then having pride in the community. And that's something that we've seen a lot of conversation around over the last year in particular. And unfortunately, in some of the surveys that we've done, those are the areas where people feel like we're not performing as well as we should be. So we see the biggest gaps in those areas. The places where people think we're doing a great job, education, higher education opportunities, young professionals organizations, not just ours, there are a lot in the community, and short commute time. Which is good, but that's not necessarily the one that is going to get them here in the first place. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of the things that we know are already happening in the community that are working on combating these things. Of course, young professionals organizations, there's YPW, there's also Wichita Urban Professionals, there are a bunch of nonprofits who have created opportunities for young professionals to both interact socially and to raise money for the nonprofits. So there are lots of opportunities that way. There are things like Open Wichita and Startup Wichita and Dev ICT and Make ICT, and I could keep going with the acronyms, but I won't. There's also a lot of community pride efforts. There are things like Fidelity Bank's Bravely Onward campaign and 360 Wichita's ICT Believer. The Chamber has done a lot of work on helping to create the groundswell of pride in the Wichita flag and making that a whole community-wide project. Visit Wichita has some great commercials that they're going out both internally and externally, because they know that if they get a bunch of people to come here, and then the people hear not great things from the people that live here, then they're not going to be as excited about returning. And so they're also focusing on how do we create that pride in place internally and continue to bring people in for conventions and tourist reasons. And then, of course, we've got the great downtown development efforts that have happened. A couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the paper, and if you look at Downtown Development's website, over $1 billion have been invested in the downtown area in the last 10 years. That's a lot of money, and that goes a long way towards that vibrant downtown. And it's great to see construction happening and lots of living opportunities in downtown, but we know there's still some work to do there. And the city has done a great job of investing in healthy lifestyle options. If you've driven around downtown at all in the last year, you've seen the expanded bike lanes and the signage for that, and doing a great job of really executing that bicycle and pedestrian master plan and making sure that some of those things that are priorities to young professionals are happening. And then, of course, we had a great new airport that opened last year. So that's a really nice new front door to the community for people that are flying in. So there are some really good things happening in the Wichita community that help young professionals want to stay here and come here. But there is still a lot of work to be done. And that's why we wanted to focus on that brain drain issue tonight. Is, voting in local elections in particular is important to continuing to make sure that those things happen in the future and that we don't lose the momentum that we already have.